Welcome everyone to the House of Shadows and Ink.
God,
Today my guest is Kyle Toucher, an amazing author. He is in Hotel Macabre Volume 2. He is in a bunch of books that we've published, a bunch of anthologies we've published. He's a Crystal Lake Publishing Patreon patron, a regular there, always busy, always writing. And I mean, Kyle, you have quite the history of a creative person. So take a moment, tell everyone who you are, what makes you awesome, and what you've done so far.
well, thanks for that intro, Johannes Philippus. My name's Kyle Toucher. I'm 6'1". I'm a Leo. Anyways, I'm from Southern California, and by I didn't get my first novel released from Crystal Lake until 2023. Did LiveWire come out in 23? I think it did. This is the first novel Crystal Lake released of mine. It's called LiveWire. It is a sci-fi cosmic horror action thriller. Sure to keep you glued to your chair because it's from what I hear, it's quite the page turner. But the way it all started really with Crystal Lake is that I was during the whole COVID hustle, I'd had nothing but time to write. And I'd been writing off and on through my whole life as a kid, writing Godzilla stories and trying other things. And by the time I decided to really pin down and get serious about it, because I had all this time, I started submitting to Shallow Waters. And the first thing you guys published was something called Freezer Burn. And I think that was in 20 or 21. And I haven't looked at that manuscript in a while. I don't even know if it's any good. It was good enough to run, right? And then I started working on two novels back to back. One was called Exeter, which is a cosmic horror Western. And first draft of that thing was loose and big and wordy and, everything. And then I went back and found an old manuscript called LiveWire that I had, which is part of the main focus is that the high tension towers you see out in the American desert or anywhere where there's civilization are animated. That's what if. That's the what if of the story, and it expanded from there. But while all that was being written, I was still submitting a lot to Shallow Waters. And so that's how the relationship with Crystal Lake began. And the stories were getting accepted and running in the competition and getting a lot more positive feedback than negative. And that's always inspiring when you're first starting out with anything, right? Whether it's, I don't care if you're a violinist or a plumber, if people start appreciating your work, it inspires you to keep going and get better at it, hopefully. And by the time I sent you guys the third draft of LiveWire, when you had an open submission, the turnaround time was quick. You guys got back to me in a couple of weeks and asked for the full manuscript. And no one was more amazed than that by me. I was surprised it made it through the slush pile, And then you guys took the manuscript. We did another edit pass on it. I'd already hired an editor before I sent it in, which is something I fully recommend for anybody, is to hire an editor for your manuscript before you send it to anybody. And it's money well spent. And it ended up getting released in September, I believe, of 23. And it got great reviews, which is, of course, also inspiring. Got a couple of bad reviews. That's to be expected because you can't please everybody, but it was just another, at least in my own personal time, it was just another block of the three things I really wanted to do. When I was a kid and I watched Frankenstein films and all the old stuff, that was because that's all that was on TV in the 70s when I was young. I go, how do I get involved in that? And then it turned into science fiction films, Earth versus the Flying Saucers, Kong, all the Japanese stuff. Even as silly as those movies got, I loved the monster scenes, smashing the cities, flying around, shooting fire out of their mouths, the colossal scale of it. How do I do that? And I didn't, I'm not a model maker or a technician in that way or anything. So I kind of put that on the back burner when I got bitten by rock and roll. So first album, excuse me, first record I ever bought was Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd. And at least I started with a high watermark. And I discovered heavy music after that. I heard Black Sabbath while they were still with Ozzy back in those days. and I didn't know guitars could make such furious noises. And I said, oh man, I got to do that. And that just consumed my life for a lot of years. And at the same time that was going on, the punk rock revolution was happening in England. This is Pistols, Clash, Damned, some of the, the club bands you've never heard about, and then Discharge. Discharge was furiously hardcore, furiously violent music, all using the devil's interval. So basically, it was extremely speeded up Sabbath. I could hear it immediately. And I said, all right, there's got to be a way to blend those two. So I started a band when I was a kid. We were called Dr. No, KNOW, and we merged first gen LA hardcore with all that dark, foreboding, metal stuff that I liked, which I related to the music from Godzilla films because it's the same stuff, right? Because listen to dum, bum, 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 bum in a Godzilla film. That's a Tony Iommi riff. I mean, it's very similar. It's that same kind of, the cadence is similar, the note values, the intervals are all very similar in that kind of music. And I was immediately attracted to that darker side of music. And I already liked horror movies. And so while all that was going on, I read The Exorcist at about 13 or 14 years old. What'd the NPC say in Tron? End of line. So that was, my fate was sealed after that. And I knew somehow, I didn't know how I was going to do it, but somehow I wanted to do all three of those things in the whatever time I was allotted here on Earth. And that's pretty much how, that's what lit the fuse. So horror films, dark, heavy music, and reading The Exorcist.
And how did you get into the film business? Because I know band-wise, I did a lot of research. We actually still get a lot of reviewers and people asking, like, is that the real Carl Taucher from like Dr. No, right? And
yes, it is.
like, yes, it is. And then like they buy your books and they want to start writing because they were following your career and they say like, whoa, no, he's writing books now. And I've always wanted to be a writer. So and then they also want to do it.
Yeah. I mean, the real inspiration to really start writing for me was when I was as a kid. I mean, I'm a kid. I mean, in my early mid-20s when we were on the road. And don't get me wrong, we weren't rock stars. It wasn't in a nice bus paid for by Sony and private jets and road crew and hookers and blow. It's not what it was. We're a bunch of meatheads in a van pulling a U-Haul, going to shitty clubs, and but we just went all through the United States and parts of Canada doing that. So when most people are tied down in some university, I went to the University of rock and roll touring, I guess. But it was all a DIY thing, especially in those days. And that's just how it was, because that's what a lot of the metal scene and the punk rock scene, which were beginning to merge at that time, were like that, unless you were had major label funding and those things, which we didn't have. But it was still a great way to spend your 20s. And so while we're traveling from place to place, if I'm not driving the van, I'm reading. And I was reading a lot of King and a lot of Lovecraft at the time. And this is Cocaine King in these days, right? So this is, all that early stuff up until, oh God, probably, maybe whatever was after It, a couple books after that, maybe up to the Dark Half, maybe that era. And I'm reading this guy's thing, and his style of writing was very conversational. It was very accessible. It wasn't writing way over your head like Lovecraft, or trying to slog through Mary Shelley or some of the other stuff that I thought was just too, I got maybe even just too complicated because I was so young, I guess. I don't know. And but I latched onto that, and I liked the early Crichton stuff, Andromeda Strain, Great Train Robbery, things like that. I remember seeing his film Westworld in the theater when I was in 6th grade, so I knew who he was. And I'd seen the Andromeda Strain fully by accident in the theater once, and I loved it. And so I read the book twice. And there's a lot of Andromeda Strain influence in LiveWire, actually. And I started thinking, I should try this. I think I might be able to do this, And so my early stuff in the 80s were King clones, which is how LiveWire started, kind of as a clone of Trucks, his old story from Night Shift, is really how it started. You know, the similarities are glaring, you know, but when it came time years and years and years later to do it into a novel, it took on its own life. But so that seed was planted during all of those years. And so after the band thing, the first run for the band thing ended in about 1990. You know, I drifted in jobs and all this stuff. And I'm getting into my early 30s now. You know, you realize, look, you're not going to be a rock star. It's not going to happen. You know, don't sell your guitars, but, you know, be realistic, right? Trust in the Lord, but steer away from the rocks. And so I was watching Babylon 5 at the time. That was in the early 90s. And it was the first show with fully CGI effects in it. And it looks dated now, of course, but yeah, you know, so does The Lost World from 1925, you know, because that technology evolves. However, you know, 2001 still looks great. And, but that's Kubrick. And so I'd already been playing around a little bit with really early dinosaur 3D software. And I get this call. I'm working in a clean room, which is a sterile environment in a CD mastering lab. And I'm working in a department there called electroforming. And what electroforming is that you take the master that came off, you're converting the metal master to a glass master to be pressed and replicated. And so there's an electronic process and a chemical bath that sort of metal plates this glass disc. From the glass disc, it creates a metal master is what happens. And anyways, that's the kind of work I was doing. And I get a phone call from whoever owned Deaf American Recordings at the time. I can't remember. The band Slayer was going to do a cover album of punk rock tunes, of hardcore tunes. And this whole project was launched by Jeff Hanneman, their guitar player, who's no longer alive. For those who don't know, he was the blonde guy who thought up all the scary riffs. And they wanted to do a song of mine called Mr. Freeze. And the advance on it was 5 G's, $5,000. And I was broke and as shit. You know, $5,000 to me was, oh, shit, I'll take it. Hey, I get a song on a Slayer record. How cool is that, right? You know, how often does that happen? And, but I used it instead of just going, oh, great, I can, go party or, pay bills. I used it as an opportunity. And what I did, I go, now I can change the course of things because I have the finances to do it. So I can buy what then was a powerful machine, a big monitor, and learn the software to try to get into the VFX industry. So it hadn't been for Slayer, there would have been no VFX career. How weird is that? And actually told Kerry King that story when I met him once at Morton's, and he couldn't believe it. He goes, no shit. I go, dude, there are 2 Emmys in my living room for VFX because you guys covered a song of mine. So anyways, I turned something that could have just been a wasteful, blithely blowing $5,000, which seemed like all the money in the world at the time. Instead, I used it to try to dig a tributary off that river of my life and go somewhere else. And so I wanted to work at Foundation Imaging. Foundation Imaging was the place that did Babylon 5, run by a guy by the name of Ron Thornton, who was the pioneer of CG effects on television, using a software called LiveWire at the time. So I got a liberated copy of the software and started to just find tutorials and everything like that. And then it turns out that this Ron Thornton guy who ran Foundation Imaging had a whole tutorial series on VHS. So I could see the stars aligning here, and it was just almost magical the way it happened. It was hard work. I fucked up a lot and did stupid shit, but I guess through either ignorance or hubris, I brought Foundation Imaging a reel 90 days after I'd been using the software. So, I bring it in and it's laughable, but the cat who was judging these artists as they'd come in looking for jobs, because they'd advertised that they were looking for jobs, which is another spoke in that wheel, right? He says, this is good. He goes, how long have you been doing this? I said, 90 days. He goes, you did this in 90 days? He goes, here's what I want you to do. We're going to fix this. I want you to fix this. Here's where your light should be coming from, camera angles and all this shit. He goes, come back in another 90 days. Let's see what you got. So again, like a positive review or somebody appreciating your work, it's inspiring. So you go back and work harder. And it got to the point where I was taking my machine to work and working on this other reel for months and months and months and months and months. I had a ship coming through a giant stargate. I'd modeled everything and coming through a giant stargate over Jupiter, and he gets attacked and there's explosions is basically the whole thing, the kind of stuff they did. And I put Mars Bringer of War by Holst as the music in the background, which again is that big Godzilla Sabbath type music, right? So again, here's everything merging, brought it in there. He said, that's really impressive progress in another 90 days. He took it upstairs and showed it to Ron Thornton, the guy who ran Foundation. And he came back downstairs. He goes, Ron likes what he says. We'll be in touch. So, I'm driving home just thinking, oh my God, so I get a call the day before my 37th birthday, because it was 1998, day before my 36th birthday. It was 1998. And he goes, yeah, we'd like to offer you a job. And we'll start you at $850. And I said $850 an hour? He goes, no, blockhead, $850 a week. And, I wasn't making anything then. I didn't realize I just doubled my money. And I said, great, see you on Monday, and it was all because of Slayer. And because it's all because of Dr. No, which is all because of Black Sabbath, which is all because of Godzilla music, which is, you can trace the lineage, you can trace the DNA all the way, right? And so I go into the studio on my first day. I'm probably 6 or 7 years older than most of the people in there. And I figured they're going to put me on Star Trek Voyager. They're doing that show at the time because I'm, spaceship guy, right? No. So you got to pay your dues, right? So they were doing a children's show at the time called Mystic Knights of Tir na Nog, shot on 16 mil in Ireland, this low budget Saban thing, but it was but they were putting in CG monsters and, and lens flare effects and all this stuff. I'd never tracked CG elements to live action. I'd never done anything like that. It didn't even occur to me because all I did was completely CG shots. So, that was trial by fire. I got put on the show, didn't know I was doing, but people were cool. And they, because it was an all new industry by that time. It was during the digital revolution. So they were putting asses in seats, anybody who was interested, who wanted to do it. And the environment was really educational. So I learned from great people, met some great lifelong friends, one of who started teaching me camera techniques, CG camera techniques. And so that job went on for quite a while, until 2001 when the place closed down. And a lot of that crew, with myself included, went to a place called Radium, and we did the Firefly pilot. Firefly was a show that was on in about 2001 or 2002 with Nate Fillion, and it was a Joss Whedon thing. And they liked our camera work and all that stuff. And so we did the pilot, and then we did the first, and then that crew was taken to a new place called Zoic Studios, which is still in Culver City. They do Game of Thrones and all this stuff now. And I stayed there for 4 years, and we did all of the Firefly stuff and the Serenity film. And in between Firefly and the Serenity film, Battlestar Galactica came in. And the supervisor there wanted the Firefly guys because of our handheld CG camera work and that whole thing. So we did the pilot for Galactica. And then I didn't do season 1 of Galactica because I was on the Serenity film. And then after that, was doing another. So during all this time, your skills are getting better. You're doing different kinds of stuff other than spaceships and airplanes. And so you're starting to learn the craft, and how to feed a compositor what they need, how to get, how to do things quickly. And, we became a machine. That Galactica crew was boosted out of Zoic by the supervisor to start an in-house team at Universal just for the BSG project. So I was there almost 10 years, and we became a pretty tight team. And that's how all that just kept going and going. And so that was, probably in my, late 30s, early 40s during that, when I could still do 60-hour weeks and, not be crippled at the end of it. And but Galactica for I think 8 straight years. Was it? Well, no. It wasn't even on that long. There were 4 seasons, but it was spread out over 6 years. Kept getting nominated for the VFX Emmy every year, up against Star Trek and other people we'd work with, and so it became kind of a friendly competition, and we won a couple of times, and it was awesome. It was great, but I didn't have time to write at all during that because it was completely life consuming, and I wrote a little bit in '05, but I hadn't, the bottom line, Joe, is that I hadn't lived long enough yet. I think, I couldn't write the stories I write today in my 20s or in my 30s. I had to wait until I'd been around long enough and observed human behavior, interact with all kinds of different people, had experienced boom and bust and, and joy and heartbreak and, and everything in my own life, I think, until I could really do it coherently. And then when the whole COVID thing happened, right after we wrapped on Maverick, I was sitting on a stack of dough after the movie. The government was giving away money to stay home. The opportunity presented itself, and that's how it all. That's the lineage. That's the DNA helix of how it all came together.
Well, that's awesome. Now, I've been an avid follower of you. So basically, since I received your first email and was introduced to your work, and even on our Patreon page, you've got quite a hardcore following of like whatever you write, from the flash fiction to novels, short stories. So the story for Hotel Macabre, Volume 2. Tell us a bit about that one, how it came to be.
Yeah. That story was originally written from a completely different perspective. Let me start at the beginning. The story in the book is called The Emperor of Roadkill. And that actually started from the title because I just liked the sound of it. I just thought of it one day and went, I got to put that in my pocket. I got to use that at some point, right? And I had, and a couple years prior to that, I'd read Stephen Graham Jones' Mongrels, which is probably the best werewolf thing I ever read. And I really liked that book. And I wasn't aping his book or anything like that, but I love the way that he just kind of put the lycanthropy in the bowels of low society. I go, God, that's great. Nicely done, because the werewolf trope and the vampire thing, just, God, it's been done to fucking death, and every time they remake Dracula, it gets shittier, I didn't like Nosferatu. Sorry. It looked great, but it needed like 40 minutes cut out of it. But anyway, I originally the original story, which I never finished, was a daughter who's down on her luck, who won't accept anything from her mother because her mother's a werewolf, and her prosperity and all her success in life has come through the predator mindset that was awakened into her once she became a werewolf. And I dropped the piece, and but before Hotel Macabre 2 came up, I'd already written a draft or two of this story, and I thought, well, maybe the daughter isn't the angle, maybe the mother's the angle, and so the gist of the story is that this werewolf, her name is Luby Barlow, and she's in her lycanthropic form, and she hears the rush of a river. Of course, the rush of the river is actually the traffic on the I-10 in Texas. And she intentionally runs in front of a giant freightliner in order to kill herself and end it. She wants to just end it. She wants to end being a killer. She wants to just the guilt she feels of her daughter resenting her, and all that is impetus for her to take her own life in werewolf form. So she is scraped from the road unceremoniously, and when she comes to now in broken human form in this little alcove where the Caltrans crew keeps their gear. Caltrans, for those who don't know, are the name of the freeway crews in California, even though this takes place in Texas. Following? Anyway, she sees this beast, this humanoid beast, who basically informs her that she has violated the gift that the werewolves have bestowed upon her for, eternal life and being an apex predator. And so her punishment for violating the fealty of that is every time she does change with the moon, she changes into the broken form on the side of the highway. So she can never satisfy the hunger. She can never hunt again. She's not cured for lycanthropy in any way. It's a punishment that she has taken that what they see as a gift to her and just basically thrown it all away. And that's the nexus of the story. And wackiness ensues. So it's a short one. It's what, 5? I think the cap on this book was what, 5K? So, for me to squeeze something into 5K can be pretty rough.
No, I love that story. I can still recall it quite well. Yeah, that's what I love about this anthology. It's like, it's a lot of the flash fiction from the Patreon page, like the winners. It's short stories like yours. There's a video reading of a story. There's like, the comic book intro and outro. There's a bit of everything. I like to do that with
it's
anthologies.
A cool format. Yeah, it's cool because
stories, I mean, a story isn't just one format. There's so many great stories across so many things. I mean, like you have music, movies, and writing. I mean, if you have a skill, it's not just the days of you only have this opportunity because of that skill is long gone. There's so many things you can do with it. And like you learn a new craft. I mean, you were in your 30s and you learned something new, which a lot of people won't even attempt. So no, hats off to you. Well done.
Well, thank you. You can teach an old dog new tricks. I'm not going to become a gymnast anytime soon, but I was never. My brother's an athlete, not me. So, and and also in the since the book started to come out and everything like that, now I can do book trailers fully in CG, and I do them in Unreal, which is a game engine that you can also render cinematically out of. It's extremely complex software, but there's when I thought of that, when Medusa Psalms was going to come out, what's the Medusa Psalms? Oh, here it is. The Medusa Psalms, Welcome to Walpurgis County, released by your pals at Crystal Lake Publishing in 2024, I believe. And it has 10 stories, 2 novellas, 1 benighted landscape. Covered by Joanna Howlers, I might add, who was a fantastic artist. And she hit the home run I pre-vised the cover did a mock-up in CG for her, and then she took it and turned it in. It's so much clarity, probably there it is. And she just nailed it. And so I did 3 trailers for that. One is a teaser thing with a narration, and then kind of an abstract thing, and then the girl running from the spinning combine blade. And then you'd ask for like a Facebook or Instagram formatted one as if it had been shot on a phone. And so that's how I did the 3rd one. And so I just had the aspect ratio instead of like this, as if someone had been shooting a phone in this old house and just sees creepy, weird shit that tangentially, connects to the stories, And I think the tease sometimes is a lot better than film trailers that give it all to you. You ever watch a film trailer and it's 2 minutes long, gives you the whole movie? And I go, why do I want to go now? And so that's been kind of a nice adjunct to writing, is to be able to make my own book trailers that way. Because you see a lot of book trailers and, here's a scary forest with the picture vibrating, and that gets, I like to give, if I have the ability to do it, I like to throw out a little more than that, and so that's all those things merging together, which has been, I've been really fortunate to be able to do that,
And I remember you did the voices yourself as well, which was
creepy. I did the Witchfinder thing, which I never really released, and that voice I did myself. But there's something I was working on for a book called Exeter, of a survivor of the incident, giving a brief overview of the story. So I recorded that in a more southern, laid-back, gentlemanly fashion. And I ran that through an AI thing called 11 Labs, and it reprocessed the voice to sound like a salty old 49er. And put that on a metahuman with a craggy face, and you can feed the audio in, it'll give you the lip sync, and I shot that on 6 cameras. I'll show it to you, and that's still a work in progress. But that changed everything. So you can do all your own voice acting with these things and manipulate the voice, and to a refined British woman to a craggy old miner in the 1880s to anything, and those are really great tools. There is a place for the AI, but I don't want it giving me speeding tickets or anything worse, or controlling my finances or any of that. It's probably more pervasive already than we think it is.
I think so
which
too.
Which leads me to Medusa Engineering. So, and for those who don't know, for those who have not read my stuff, they are like the corporate bad guys. They're like Google and Raytheon and any other bloodthirsty corporate entity you could think of, who also happen to be occultists. So they're a dark hand over a lot of the stuff that I write, because a lot of the stuff I write is all connected in one way or another. And that's part of the fun too, is when those ideas come, when you're in the middle of writing, somebody go, oh, that is a connection. So you can go down those roads. And I think that kind of makes it fun, so if people do read my stuff as it comes out, they can start making the connections. Oh, this guy was in this story, that event is referenced here, and and those things. I think it makes it fun.
Definitely. And so what's next? Are you still doing movies? You still writing?
Well, the whole VFX industry in Los Angeles has just tanked hard. Last year was real bad news. And this year it's seen a little bit of an uptick. I did about 13, 14 weeks on The Resurrection of the Christ, the new Mel Gibson thing. So he's doing and it's not just resurrected Jesus running around talking to people for 40 days, because in order to tell the story of what the crucifixion means, he also has to tell the story of Lucifer. And so we were pre-visiting a lot of what we were calling Old Testament's greatest hits in there. And it's going to be 2 films. First one comes out on Easter 27. The second half of it 40 days later on Ascension Day. So for now, my work on that is complete, because we were just pre-visiting, meaning getting basically shooting the storyboards in CG so that they're moving and they can get an idea of, how the camera's going to move, what, looking at their blocking that they suggested in motion. And so we did a lot of work on that. There might be post-viz stuff coming later, doing early versions of the VFX shots. I don't know. But right now, I also work for a company that does stuff for a lot of military vendors. So they do demonstration videos of targeting communications and weapon systems and crazy stuff. And, autonomous drones the size of fighter jets that can take off from aircraft carriers, refuel from another drone, go on missions, all kinds of just insane stuff. And, I've spent years shooting jets and spaceships and stuff like that. So my job mostly in that is to make a lot of the aircraft look cinematic in their videos. You put an 18mm lens on an F-18, it's going to look like a needle. It's not going to look good. You put a 125mm lens on an F-18, it compresses the image. It looks big and aggressive and has that Michael Bay kind of feel. Why do helicopters look so good in Michael Bay movies? Because he has a super long lens on him, and that's why they look cool. That's why the car chases look intense, because the image is compressed. Everything looks closer and tighter and more crazy. We started doing a lot of that in Galactica, so because the ship is 1 kilometer in length and the nose is big and blunt, but the fighters are this big, So if you only show a piece of the nose and the fighter coming in, it makes the ship look bigger, Look at The Empire Strikes Back when they're escaping, when they're, ejecting themselves with the trash in that scene in the movie. They go past just a sliver of the ship in it with all these nurnies and detail and windows and the Falcons like this big, it makes the Star Destroyer look huge. So sometimes the less you show on screen, the bigger it looks, So we learned that early on, and there's, influences everywhere,
Oh, I'm a big fan of, the influences and what you take in and becomes part of you. And like you said, like everything has lined up perfectly because everything that happened before becomes part of your future and you use it to your
right,
benefits. And that's a good
right.
thing to do. And we
Yeah,
have to choose what we like take in. And
absolutely. The phrase I use is all roads lead to where you are, you know. And I never really targeted or had a, uh, distinct plan for success or anything. I mean, I'm not sitting on stacks of dough or anything like that. I mean, it's, I'm not driving a Ferrari or, I mean, there's none of that, but, I the three major things I wanted to do in my life, I managed to do it. But I mean, I just ended up with the right people and maybe enough moxie to be, dumb enough to think I could do it, you know. But I don't know. I really enjoy writing. There's days when it's really, really hard, when the words don't come. That's when I go back in the manuscript and edit, you know, and that's when I find glaring mistakes and, or things I don't like, clicky sentences and everything. But you have to, King said it on writing, you got to read a lot and you got to write a lot, you know. And if you're up to your neck in work all day, it's hard to sit down and because you got a family life, we got a house, we got 6 animals living in the house. There's a lot, there's a lot of moving parts, and you have to carve the time out to do it. So now I'm staying up late at night and writing, especially if I'm on a job and I got to give that 10 hours of my day. That's why it was so easy during all that COVID stuff because I could just have like 2 long sessions every day. That really helped. It was great getting out of the gate like that. It's like practicing an instrument. You got to do your 10,000 hours, right?
Yep.
I don't think Eddie Van Halen sounded like that when he was 11. So, but look where he ended up, right? Look where anybody you admire in any skill ended up. And you just got to keep doing it and doing it. And I like to think the writing quality is getting better because the quality is, I think, everything. It's very easy to string sentences together and move a character from the car to the living room to burying a corpse in the backyard, right? But how are you going to tell that story? How are you going to paint it? And that's what I took from the Clive Barker stuff I read, up until a Magica or whatever. And, I really like the way the guy painted. I like the way King was put you in the real world. I liked William Peter Blatty's dialogue. I really liked his dialogue. And if things had to get technical, no matter how ridiculous, as long as it's plausible, I liked how Crichton, who's maybe not the best wordsmith in the world, but I really liked how he explained technology so that it was plausible, And so those are the kind of things I drew from when I started doing my own thing. And I liked the eerie, omnipresent brooding of Lovecraft. So I think that's kind of where, at least in the Medusa Psalms mythos, the Walpurgis County stuff, that's where I think all that comes together, or at least I'm trying to do that.
No, I can definitely see all of those things in your work.
Yeah, Blatty started as a comedy writer. He was writing comedies for Blake Edwards. He wrote one of the Pink Panther movies in the mid '60s. His early books are farces. And he gets pegged as he's dead now, but he gets pegged as a horror writer because of The Exorcist. And Legion. And Legion was a great book. And they made, Friedkin and him made the first film in '73, which is still a high watermark because they took it seriously. Maybe the animatronic effects look dated now, but it's not about that. It's that story. It's the way it's treated. It's the way it's shot. It's the way it's acted. And then years later, when Blatty made Legion, which they call Exorcist 3, and he stayed pretty close to the source material of his book. And why that movie is scary is because you don't see anything. You know, you really, I mean, Warner Brothers made him tack on an exorcism at the end of the film. You know, gotta have an exorcism. You know, well, I guess I gotta. They're paying for it. Fuck. You know, he did what he could with it. But the dialogue between Kinderman and uh, and Karras in that movie in the cell is the meat of that entire film. You know, and that, you know, that's the juice. You know, because you should have action scenes, car chases, plane crashes, whatever, you know, knife fights, whatever it's going to be. But people speak to one another, and they have to be coherent. And you know, dialogue is a huge part of it. Not that by no way it's master, but I don't know. I really latched onto the way Blatty the way Blatty wrote dialogue. I really thought he was a master at that. And there's others who are just as good, but that really stuck out to me.
I remember when I read your LiveWire submission years ago. Um, Pretty much at the beginning, there's a father-son scene at the gas station, and the
Mhm.
dialogue between those two and the way you wrote it. So the dialogue and how quick they bonded with the characters, I pretty much knew already this, we're going to publish this. But of course, I kept reading and I checked in with the seed, well, the
Yeah, nothing even happened
original
yet.
team. Yes,
Yeah.
no, that hooked me. So I always recommend that book for just like dialogue and the characters, like very well written,
LiveWire,
acting out characters. Yes.
pictured here in the popular paperback format, is you know, once it starts rolling, as I think any horror book should do, you know, I don't think you should come right out of the gate with a monster chewing somebody's head off. You know, there's interview sections in the book with one of the survivors of the incident, and that starts feeding you things. You go, oh wow, something really insane happens down the road here. Let's, you know, wait until we get there. And that gives you, it also provides backstory of how they got there. And then in the middle of the book or so, we're at the Medusa Engineering of, well, they're at the VLA, which really exists in New Mexico, where Medusa Engineering is doing their project, and then we finally find out exactly why towers are running around and everything. As impossible as the situation is, again, the idea is to make it somewhat plausible, so you go with it. You know, that's what I think is the fun of it.
Mm.
You know, but it's a pretty relentless book. You know, and there's no real, it's kind of an ensemble piece. There's no real main character in it, you know, although later a character emerges as the hero, you know, one you wouldn't think, at least I think. And that just kind of happened organically as I was writing it. And I realized when I got to the end of the book, oh, it's that guy, you know, and and, you know, part of the Crichton stuff in there is the interview sections, the redacted documents, you know, the Medusa Engineering internal documents and all that. That's all out of the Andromeda Strain, certainly influenced by that. I love that idea. And Blatty did that too. He would be medical reports and things like that, and police reports and things like that. And King did that a lot in Carrie, you know, and, you know, someone in an epistolary fashion, you know, which brings me to Dead Letters. You and uh, Stephen Moore did that, and there were really cool takes on the epistolary format in that one. You know, the especially J.A.W. McCarthy's story with the emails and text messages about the hand and the. I mean, everybody loved that. That's the standout story in the whole thing. You know, my story's 1,000 miles long, and you know, and supposed to read like 19th century writing and everything like that. So, you know, I can see how people get pulled out. You know, they don't think it's fast enough. You know, but that whole story is about dread. You know, that entire story is about the dread of a lost wagon train with some occult weirdo leading them into hell. You know, and so I think there's a little bit of everything in that book. And the epistolary format, I think, is a really underused thing. You know, and I've done it a few times. I really like doing that.
Mm.
You know, and it's fun
Yes.
because you get a little bit more verbose and a little bit more purple prose, especially if they take place in the 19th century, you know, and that stuff's kind of fun, you know. Maybe I watched too much Deadwood. I don't know, you know,
So yes,
but
no, you've amazing job on all of them. So I recommend Medusa Psalms, Livewire, Dead Letters, your music,
to
your
hell,
movies.
To Hell and Back, which you edited.
Oh, yes, that's true.
Yeah,
For
yeah,
Hellbound
Greg,
Books.
yeah, and Greg's in there, and Jay, and Francesca's in there, and my story's in. God, what's the name of it? Speakers of Imminent Darkness, and is in there too, and that ties loosely into the Walpurgis County thing, loosely, but it is there. So there's a I try to keep the thread going through that and everything but the Mason chain stuff that I write. And so one of the fun things of that though is it was a shallow waters thing. I think it was summer camp, I think was the theme. So I did the same story from two different perspectives. I did one under my name as the kid who's sent to a cheap summer camp by his parents, because he's a kid from the poor family. He has to go to this cheap, shitty summer camp that's out in the middle of the San Bernardino Desert. For those who don't know, San Bernardino County in Los Angeles is mostly Mojave Desert, and he meets an interesting roommate there, a kid by the name of Mason Chain, and the other story is written by Mason Chain from his perspective. He's sent there as punishment because he's a troublemaker in school. And while they're there, they witness in the distance an occult ritual going on at night, and they plot their escape from the summer camp. And I had to squeeze both those stories into 1,500 words. But the other Mason Chain stuff is that he's an occult fixer. He's like Ray Donovan. I don't know if you've seen the Ray Donovan show in South Africa or not. So he's basically the occult version of Ray Donovan. He'll get you out of sticky situations. And I have a few of those things, one of which is really long. It's 12,000 words, and there's really no place to put it, So if you ever have an antho that has a limit above 5K, and so he's fun to write too. I'd like to do a whole book of his stuff, but I'm currently on a novel now I think it's almost at 129,000 words, and it's not done. But I do know the ending.
Oh.
So the ending struck me one day. We were getting ready to leave the house one day, and I had the laptop, and I go, wait a minute, we can't leave. She's all ready to go, has her bag and the keys, and I go, wait, give me 10 minutes. Clickety clack, typos, red underline, all kinds of words, right? And it just looked like shit, but I got it out. I saved it. I said, okay, now I know. And it turned out I had the pieces in the story all along, and I didn't realize it. And sometimes that's how inspiration happens, right? It just kind of hit me. So I know how it's going to end. Now I got everybody converging, and the goal is to get it done by the end of the holidays. So I don't know how long it's going to be at the end, but $140, something like that when it's done, and it ties into all the Medusa Psalms mythos, but deals with a lot of old Hollywood, and a lot of it takes place in the modern day too. So it goes between the two. So a 50s crooner who was offered the world on a silver platter, but only if he would participate in a very heinous act, and he refused to do it. And wackiness ensues from there, and there's a lot of weird, spooky, supernatural stuff along the way, and his spirit enlists the lonely heart of one of his a spinster fan of his to do his dirty work for him, to enact recompense against the people that suicided him. Let's put it that way. So, it gets, there's a lot of big cast characters, a lot going on. And of course, it turns out one of the members of the cast begins to slowly realize throughout the story that he's from Walpurgis County, that he's from there, that that's his root. Because in the lore, in the Medusa Psalms, in the lore established in this book, if you're from Walpurgis County and allowed to leave, you simply forget. And then his memories start coming back to him in the middle of the missing persons investigation. I've given enough away about that, but tentatively it's called Maker, and that's what I'm on now.
Oh no, awesome! And we will have links to your, if you're on any social media, if there's any way people can subscribe to you, or just links to your books. We'll put all of it in the description. Hotel Macabre Volume 2 is, of course, is also in there. And depending on when you watch this, maybe all of these books will be available already. So
Yeah, I didn't,
and
I didn't have
more.
a release. Yeah, I didn't have a release in 25 because I was really busy. I just got stuck at 85K, and I was, so I wrote other things. And the worst thing is coming back to a manuscript after you've dropped the ball on it. But I managed to do it, and you really should see it through. You're not going to, that made things hard. But eventually, the spark got, lit again, and then the ending came to me, and so thank God, because I really didn't want to lose it. And the there's a bunch of stuff on the Patreon page too. The last thing I think I did for Shallow Waters was called Absolute Zero, and that's about a Medusa engineering project going wrong at CERN, and I think that's the last Shallow Waters thing I did, and I just haven't had time to do them because there's got so much other stuff going on. But I'd like to get back into that because those are fun. And there's a lot of, and there's a whole new, from when I was doing it, over those 2.5 years, there's a whole new crew of people coming through. It's a really cool thing that you have there because it's like this revolving door, of writers who come in. And so you're discovering people there whose books you're putting out.
A lot of those authors from your, let's say, era that on Patreon, I mean, like Greg Stewart, a lot of them got contracts now. The last 2-3 weeks.
You're doing Greg's book. You're doing Jay's book. Yeah, that's awesome.
I'm very happy about that.
Yeah, I'm glad Jay's back on the horse and writing, and I love Greg's stuff. You should read Kim Reaper if you get a chance. It's a really nice, fun read, and he's great. And his story in The Night Nurses of Verdun. I can't remember if that was in. Yeah, that was in. Was that in Dead Letters or was that in To Hell and Back? The vampires in World War I on the battlefield.
It sounds very familiar. I think that's To Hell and Back.
I think it's in To Hell and Back. It's a great story. He's really talented. And it's great to see it that, because everybody's getting inspired to write. And reading isn't dead. It's just been comatose for a while. And you guys, how many books a year are you cranking out in 26? How big is your release roster?
Because remember, now we have kids' books. We've got Sinister Smile Press, Starred Waters, the Crystal Cove, young adult stuff. I think it's going to be 60 books next year.
Jesus.
And at least 1 or 2 comic books, and starting our next board game project and our first game book.
Wow.
But like the starting steps. And then, of course, 2 YouTube channels and a magazine and a podcast. So...
Oh, shame you're not doing anything with your life. Why are you being such a slacker? Come on, get the little program.
I'm not so young anymore, like you say. Like,
well, you're gonna have to branch into Crystal Lake Films or something next.
I can't wait. Yes, like animation and like CGI, that kind of stuff is definitely somewhere where I want to go, especially with like IPs
I know people
we already own. Yes, like so. Who knows? So we're starting with the puppets for the kids show, but I mean the actual idea was animation. But yeah,
you start small. You do a 3-minute short or something, and get that. Don't do what I did and write a 130,000 word novel when you hadn't written anything in 20 years. That was probably not the best idea. But you know what? You got to do that because you got to blow the dust off the off the creaking joints and be like the Tin Woods one. Once you get the rust off, things start flowing. And so at least I'm not rusty anymore. But the rusty period is hard to get through. So and to anyone who's considering writing and hasn't in a while or dropped it and not thinking you're getting any juice out of it, you can't do it thinking that you're going to end up with the Stephen King deal in 1976. It's, it's not going to happen unless you're a politician money laundering book release, that's why they get $30 million for a book. It's money laundering. For those who didn't know, and but you do it because you feel compelled to do it. You do it because it makes you happy. And even in Jay Bechtol's bio, it goes, Jay writes because he likes it, right? And that's really why you do it. And if other people want to, and come in on the journey with you, it's great. The best thing that could have ever happened when I was in that band is that people told me later on. We put the band back together for a while from 2011 to 2015, did a bunch of shows, totally different perspective in my 50s. And there are guys our age bringing their kids who dug our records, and they're all up front singing the lyrics and giant mosh pit, the whole chaos. And they go, yeah, man, when I was a kid listening to your records, it made me want to be in a band. That's awesome. That's what you want to hear, that you help inspire others. If something I wrote did that, it may not, but if it did, I think that's fabulous. I've never been able to meet any author that did that for me, and I think that would be a fabulous thing. I've met musicians it's done for me, and VFX artists that I've met and worked with over the years and said, dude, I learned something from you every time I work with you, and I think they appreciate hearing that. I think anybody appreciates or can, anybody enjoys and takes inspiration, I would hope, from people reacting positively to their work. And for those who react negatively, you can't get bogged down in that. You can't please everybody. Some people might think my writing is too ornate, or that it's too weird or whatever, but you can't get whatever it is, there aren't enough, amputees with ADD in your stories or whatever it is, right? But you can't get bogged down in that. So if you're inspired to write and you're thinking about doing it, sit down tonight, bang out 500 words, even if it's describing, the cat going through your sock drawer, or whatever it is. The language is there. The English language is extremely descriptive. I think it's probably maybe because it was one of the last languages developed. I don't know. We've gone beyond clicks and grunts. We have all this entire toolbox at our disposal. And it's really fun to rummage around in it,
I agree.
Of course,
definitely.
Making it make sense. That's the hard part, right? Real life doesn't have to make sense, but fiction does. Unless you're David Lynch.
I actually wanted to ask you any advice to authors, but you basically just gave a lot of info there and some inspiration as well. So well done.
Yeah, like I said, I'm by no means the purveyor of wisdom in this, because I barely even know any other authors, and I barely have my toe in the water. But what I've learned is that you've got to keep at it. You know what I mean? You're not going to be Itzhak Perlman on the violin on day one. It's not going to happen. You're not going to write the great American. There's anomalies, sure, but there's got to be inherent skill, that lights that spark in you anyway, that makes you think I could take a crack at this, right? Because if that wasn't in there, I don't think you would even think that. So it's a gift. You're given a gift to be able to do that kind of thing, and it has to be developed. It has to be farmed. You have to take care of it, nurture it, for to use a fuzzy feely term, and it's if you were given that gift, you should run with it, no matter what it is. I don't care if you want to write horror or romance or political thrillers or whatever it is. Maybe you can combine all three. Why not? And so that's the fun of it. I should write down my ideas when I get them, because they all escape. But I think if you get inspired to write something, sit down and at the very least try it. It's a recipe. There's going to be variants. No,
100%. Thank you so much, Kyle. So everyone who's listening, check out Kyle's books, check out Hotel Macabre Volume 2, check out all the links in the description. Follow Kyle, follow Chris Lake, follow the House of Shadows and Ink, get your copies, leave reviews, tell your friends.
If you've read any of my books and have not left a review, positive or negative, I'm not going to blubber, please do so, because it always helps, because that's what gives things juice, and that helps the algo. Honestly, that's what helps the algorithm on Amazon to help make other writers, any writer that you enjoy, more prominent. And so the Medusa Psalms is a good primer. for the Walpurgis County lore, because it's non-chronological, but it'll tell you exactly what that place is about. And LiveWire is a high-octane, top-fuel sci-fi cosmic horror action adventure that also ties into the mythos, but not nearly as hard as the other books. And it's been, a real privilege to have books released, and I'm glad you guys rolled the dice on me. And that's what it all is. Everybody's got to roll the dice. You got to just stick your neck out and do it. Don't ask, don't get.
No, definitely. Thank you so much, Kyle. Thanks everyone for watching, and keep an eye out. This is not the last time you're going to see Kyle here on the House of Shadows and Ink.
Yeah, X and Instagram, which I don't really post on a lot, but I do. That's where the book trailers are. You can definitely see them there. It's just my name is one word, Kyle Toucher, Kyletouchcr. I spelled my name wrong, Kyletoucher. And that's where you can find me on Instagram. And of course, your good friends at Crystal Lake Publishing have all the links and all the goods. So get out there, buy a book. It's Christmas. Scare the hell out of your neighbors. All right.
Thanks, Kyle. Cheers.
All right. Good to meet you, Joe. Merry Christmas, everybody. We'll see you next time.